believe before that.
I do. Thank you. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. There we go. Hi there. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Cox. I'm a division chief with CalFire here in the San Mateo County division of CalFire. We provide fire protection for most of the unincorporated parts of the county under contract with San Mateo County. I'm here to speak today a little bit about heat as it relates to fire. I know this is a hot topic, and we talk about puns, Supervisor Horsley. But I also know that there's a break at the end of my presentation, so I'll keep it brief and I'll get to the point. So I just wanted to start things off and kind of give some perspective to where we are right now. 2018 was the worst fire season on record in California in the last 100 years. We came off of the worst fire season ever on top of that, the year before in 2016. And we're under this emerging trend which former Governor Brown called the new normal, which a lot of people now are starting to call the new abnormal. What is normal is really what was abnormal before. So last year we had about 7,500 fires, 1.8 million acres of land burned, and maybe the starkest number and something I'd never really expected in my career is 22,000 structures, and the majority of those being homes burned in California last year. So this is where we're at. That's 2018. And the question we get all the time in the fire service is, what is going on? What is this new normal? And just to put it in context, this is kind of the equation that's being used, the kind of formulation of what the new normal is. There's no doubt about it that the climate is changing and it's impacting firefighting, and there's 3 components for us that are really the biggest part of that. The weather is one of them, vegetation is the second, and the length of fire season is the third. But maybe the most important of all this is inside of weather, which is what we're talking about today, which is temperatures and heat. Because so many things that we deal with on the ground as firefighters are predicated on the impacts of heat. The second part of this new normal is really the human factor, the human component. The fire suppression efforts that we've done over the last 100 years have kept fires small, but they've also built up a lot of fuel throughout the state. The population has grown. We're at 40 million people now in the state of California, and we live in some really bad areas. We've developed in some very bad parts of the state. So you put all that together as the human impact. You put on top of this the climate change and what's going on a global scale, and you get this new normal. And that really is more fires, more destruction, and more frequency in these large events occurring. So this is the new normal. This is the kind of equation that is being used for that. It's firefighter proof. It's 3, 3, and 3. Anyone can remember it. So let's go a little bit deeper into kind of heat and weather specifically. Everything in the fire service is related to fire behavior. We always talk about how a fire behaves. In the wildland environment, there's 3 components to that. There's weather, there's topography, and there's fuels. 2 of those things don't change very quickly. That's topography and fuel. The one variable that always dictates how a fire is going to behave is the weather itself. And specific inside of that weather, as I said, is the heat component to it. And the reason heat is so important is because heat actually kind of correlates with relative humidity. So when the heat is up in California, the relative humidity comes down. And when you have low RHs in the state, you get a lot more fire behavior. In addition to that, high temperatures dries out our fuels, and we classify our fuels between 1 to 10,000 hour fuels, basically how long it takes for that size fuel to dry out. Leaves, for example, or small twigs are considered 100-hour fuels, and when they get down to the 8% range, that's when they're going to start to carry fire. Right now in the state, we've had a lot of late season rain, so we're just starting to see the brush take ignition when it actually catches fire. But it's all predicated and dictated by the temperatures that it's been exposed to for a length of time. And one thing you kind of hear very often is red flag warnings, and we hear them more and more often, and they are the common theme behind all of these large and damaging fires across the state. And what a red flag warning is it meets 3 conditions. It has to have 100-hour fuels that are below 8%, so those small twigs and leaves are going to burn relatively easily. It has to have relative humidities that are less than 25% for an extended period of time. And it has to have some wind. I believe it's something like 15 miles an hour for several hours to occur. So you put those 3 together, you package them, and you have fire conditions that are primed to burn throughout the state of California. for everyone, as we go into the kind of next decade, this whole idea of red flag warnings is starting to get a lot of momentum, because we can really understand how bad a fire is going to be beforehand, just like we can tell if there's going to be a tornado warning or watch in the Midwest. We can do that for fires over here. I'm going to try to play a video. It's always a risk.
This fire is making a significant push into the northwestern portion of Redding. The fire community is extremely heartbroken as we mourn the loss. We also battle a fire that is moving extremely quickly and erratically into western Redding.
A lot of people working on fire lines today who have either lost homes, have family members who have lost homes, or certainly have been evacuated, and just some Herculean efforts overnight between law enforcement, firefighters, and many others to pull people from harm's way. 2018, it's really off to the same difficult, challenging firefight that we've seen in 2017, and before that, 2016. The last 5 or 6 years in California, we've been experiencing the effects of our long-standing drought. Right now, we're averaging about 45 to 50 fires a day.
This is part of a trend, a new normal that we've got to deal with. And we're dealing with it humanly, financially, and governmentally. We got a lot to do, right now to get over this momentary crisis. It's not just here in Redding, it's in other parts of the state. Tragedy brings us closer together, but out of that, we learn to depend on each other and work together.
So this was the CalFire about a year ago up in Redding. Fortunate experience last 2 years of being assigned to the Tubbs Fire, the CalFire, the Camp Fire, and the Woolsey Fire over basically an 18-month period. But something that was really interesting that day that this fire tornado occurred on the CalFire was the weather, and specifically the highest recorded temperature in Redding that day. We had 113 degrees record high in Redding that day, which was extreme even for Redding standards. We had an extreme low, about 5 degrees below average on the coast of California. And what happened that afternoon when the fire came into Redding is we had basically a bunch of velocity downhill wind coming into the Central Valley, being pushed down by a thermal low and kind of creating a wave. And when that wave hit the Sacramento River, kind of in the Keswick Dam area, it created a tornado. And it created the largest fire tornado ever documented in Northern California, which was an F3 tornado that came through the city of Redding. That is probably the starkest example of what temperatures are doing for us out in the field. The unfortunate part of this is people were in the way, right? And we had several firefighters who were killed, ejected from vehicles. We had power lines that were taken out. That was a metal pole that was wrapped around a post. And just kind of some extreme examples of what's occurring because of the heat and the weather in the state. I'm going to make this really brief because I got a bunch of slides. I want to give a huge shout out to Molly Peterson and K2AD. If you guys haven't heard their reporting on wildfires, it's fantastic. When you talk about, what was I listening to recently, the Living with Fire in California Reimagined is fantastic. Suki Lewis, Molly, Danielle Benton, Craig Miller, awesome. I highly recommend it. But one thing they did a really good story on was nighttime temperatures. And nighttime temperatures in California have a very big impact about how a fire behaves during the day. And that increase in trend is actually what we're seeing out there with this increased fire behavior. And what that's doing to our lands is creating 129 dead and dying trees across the state. So the heat is having a lot more impact than just fire behavior and firefighting, but it's actually changing the landscape. Just to kind of finish this all off and wrap it up together, what does this mean for us as firefighters? It means a couple things as we move forward. We're seeing on these large fires that firefighting is not effective on wildland fires in red flag conditions during the initial attack. They're turning into mass casualty and mass rescue events. We're also seeing that multi-agency coordination is more important. longer deployments for firefighters. We've had to call on resources from out of the state 4 times in the last 2 years, which on average we do less than once every 10 years. So we're starting to see a big dependence on resources from outside the state as well. The evacuation orders are required earlier and across larger areas because of the way the fires are behaving. And the burning period and the burning kind of fire behavior is going off the charts and having big impacts on what's being lost and destroyed. And now, one of the things I always like to end with is just the realization that these fires, climate change, heat, fire behavior, it all falls on the shoulder of the most vulnerable populations in our community. And I think that's something we always have to end with on these presentations, is those who have any vulnerabilities, anyone who might be disabled or elderly, are the ones that need the most attention and the most thought in our communities when we're out there. That's for all of us if we have to evacuate, thinking about those who we go around and with. So with that, I know that Matt, you talked a little bit about the potential in the future. This is the climate study that Dr. Westerling did for San Mateo County, looking at the historic average, the good and the worst when looking at climate change as far as where the most vulnerable areas for fire are. San Mateo County, has a couple of those areas. Specifically, a lot of the coastal areas, El Granada, etc., are starting to emerge as kind of very vulnerable spots in the county. So this is it. It's a super brief 10-minute presentation on the new normal and what heat is doing for us in the fire service. I'm happy to chat about it. If you guys ever want a phone call or an email, please get in touch. And I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you, Disney.